This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Global health experts continue with high-level virtual discussions on the coronavirus pandemic. Voters in Tanzania and Cote d'Ivoire gear up for critical national elections. And Durban launches a climate change action plan amid concerns about Africa's environmental vulnerabilities. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Talks between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan over the Grand Renaissance Dam resume on Tuesday. And Sudan and Israel to discuss agreements to cooperate on trade and migration in the coming weeks. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. We start the hour with our ongoing coverage of the coronavirus pandemic. Global health experts have held their second day of high-level virtual consultations at the World Health Summit. The conference meets annually in Berlin to discuss global health challenges. But as Trent Murray reports, this year's event is very much focused on one main topic of conversation, COVID-19.
In a regular year, Berlin would be seeing 2,500 health experts visiting the city to attend the World Health Summit. But this, of course, isn't a normal year, with the COVID-19 pandemic preventing the German capital from hosting major conferences. But technology has come to the rescue for event organisers, with experts from over 100 countries joining a virtual event entirely via video calls. The high-stakes summit comes as Europe battles a major resurgence of COVID-19. The head of the World Health Organization said technology had not only prevented the conference from being cancelled, but it also played a central role in the fight against coronavirus.
Underpinning the new strategy is a vision to improve health for everyone, everywhere, by accelerating the development of accessible, affordable, and sustainable digital health solutions. It calls for the use of technology to prevent, detect, and respond to epidemics and pandemics while ensuring the ethical use of health data.
As doctors across Europe work to save lives, many governments are pinning their hopes on an effective vaccine to help turn the tide on the virus. It's something the Global Vaccine Alliance says is looking increasingly possible as more countries collaborate with one another.
It's the only true global solution that we have to end the acute stage of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the goal of the COVAX facility is to make sure that we have equitable access for all of the countries, and so that income is not a barrier to access to vaccines. Very, very good news that China is now part of the COVAX facility. It really gives momentum to our efforts in terms of ensuring equitable access to vaccines. And I think very important to have China join and now be part of the 184 economies involved, I think.
The arrival of a vaccine can't come soon enough as the resurgence continues to hit key sectors.
Germany's central bank has warned the economic recovery this year may be considerably slower than it had first hoped. A sharp rise in new infections coupled with fresh restrictions is expected to hit the hospitality and retail sectors particularly hard, right at a time of the year they'd normally be gearing up for busy Christmas crowds.
The health and economic picture is looking increasingly bleak across much of Europe, but experts maintain that individual efforts to control the spread could once again flatten the curve, buying some much-needed time until an effective vaccine can be delivered. Trent Murray, CGTN, Frankfurt.
The World Health Organization is calling for solidarity and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. Concerns are growing that countries with smaller financial muscle could be left at the back of the queue for a vaccine. The WHO warned that this will only prolong the coronavirus pandemic. The Global Health Agency has launched an international scheme known as COVAX to help ensure equitable access, but it has struggled to raise the necessary funds.
The best way to do that is vaccinate some people in all countries rather than all people in some countries. Let me be clear. Vaccine nationalism will prolong the pandemic, not shorten it. The only way to recover faster, be it lives or livelihoods, is to recover together.
Well, delegates at the World Health Summit have come together to tackle topics such as pandemic preparedness in the age of COVID-19 and advancing innovative treatments. Our correspondent Trent Murray now joins us live from Frankfurt with more. Trent, to begin with, what are some of the key highlights coming out of today's virtual sessions of the World Health Summit?
Yeah, well, good evening. It has been another very busy day for the World Health Summit. A couple of the key topics on the agenda today are digital collaboration, pandemic preparedness, and women's health. But of course, this summit is happening very much in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, meaning that it is really taking centre stage in terms of what is the main topic of conversation among those attendees. And even though the summit can't go ahead physically in Berlin this year because of the pandemic, we have seen a real host of very high-profile names in attendance. We've had the head of the World Health Organization, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. We've had the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and we've also had the Director of the Africa Centre for Disease Control, Dr. John Nkangasong. So there really has been a number of people really trying to come together to try and find some of these solutions to COVID-19. We still have another day ahead of us with this summit, plenty on the agenda to discuss.
And Trent, of course, the issue of access to any proven COVID-19 vaccine is very critical to African countries and indeed other developing countries around the world. What kind of assurances are emerging from global health authorities at the World Health Summit?
Well, you might have seen in the story there an interview with a representative from Gavi. Now, that is the Global Alliance for Vaccines. They are working hand in glove, if you will, with the World Health Organization, and they really have a singular focus, which is trying to ensure that when a vaccine is developed for COVID-19, that it is delivered to all the countries that need it, not just a handful. And of course, that includes a number of African nations that need to make sure that they too get adequate supply of the vaccine. Now, that Gavi World Health Organization partnership involves some 180 countries, again, a number of them from across Africa, and they are hoping that by next year they'll be able to produce around 2 billion doses of the vaccine once it's proven effective. So obviously a lot more work to do, but it has really become a focus of those decision makers to ensure that there isn't hoarding by some countries, especially in Europe in particular, when it comes to a vaccine. The German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, even spoke about this at the health conference. He rallied against what he called vaccine nationalism and really called on nations to not try and hoard up all the supplies and to make sure that there was enough to go around, including for some of those people in the developing world.
And Trent, still one more day to go before the summit concludes. What is on the agenda?
Well, while COVID-19, of course, is the main focus, organisers of the event are stressing that they want to make sure other areas of health aren't completely ignored. There will be sessions tomorrow on refugee and migrant health to make sure those very vulnerable people are getting the health attention that they deserve. As well, there will be a session where the Global Fund for AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria will be in attendance, again, trying to make sure that those other very serious diseases are still discussed despite the very current and pressing pandemic stemming from COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Trent Murray, live with us there from Frankfurt, following, of course, the World Health Summit. Now, there is some positive news for Africa's healthcare systems that are seeking to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. A new hospital ship is expected in sub-Saharan African waters soon. Mercy Ships, which is an international NGO, has brought life-saving treatment to more than 2 million people in the poorest countries around the world over the last 40 years. One of the ships, called the Global Mercy, has been built outside Beijing in China and will join another, the African Mercy, to bolster the medical mission. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
The Global Mercy is being described as a modern-day marvel. It's taking to the seas at a time when global healthcare systems, especially those in Africa, have been stretched to the limit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
What we are doing is really helping to mitigate some of the disruptions and fill the gaps in the healthcare system created by COVID-19. We look at some of the mothers and children, for example, who are not able to get essential healthcare services. And this has caused some deaths, not due to COVID-19, but as a result of COVID-19.
The state-of-the-art floating hospital will join its predecessor, the Africa Mercy, which has been operating along the African coast since 2007.
So just think back the 30-year history of Mercy ships. We've used vessels that have been donated, that have been refurbished, that have been retooled. You know, the Africa Mercy now is a Danish ferry, you know, that was converted into a hospital. Mercy, on the other hand, is designed for this service.
Mercy ships have been around since 1978 and have treated over 2 million people. It's brought critical medical and surgical care to a continent where many are still dying of preventable diseases.
We have agreements with multiple countries around the sub-Saharan belt of Africa, the west side of Africa. And in addition to Madagascar and other countries, we've also served there. But the focus has been West Africa. And the reason for that is that that's where the greatest need is, the greatest opportunity.
The organization also equips a new generation of medics to continue the work on the ground.
We have trained and provided basic instructions in health to over 240,000 African healthcare practitioners. And with the Global Mercy, we are going to double that. We're going to double the amount of people we're reaching.
The Global Mercy will set sail from China to African shores in a few months. It will bring hope and healing for many who cannot afford medical treatment. Julie Shire, CGTN, Durban, South Africa.
Well, turning to election season now, with only 2 days to go until Tanzania's general election, there is an increasing emphasis on the youth vote. Over 23 million citizens are registered to cast a ballot, but only 14 million actually did so back in 2015. That means 9 million people were unaccounted for. CGTN's Isaac Lukando has more.
22-year-old Tariq Shamte is excited about voting. He and 8 million others will be voting for the first time in Tanzania's general election. Tariq says being able to effect change is his main motivation.
Something I wanted for a long time, to choose the leader I want, the person I think is right for the moment. And because of this, I'm happy because I know we will elect a leader that will help us.
Tariq's friend, 22-year-old Amin Mkosa, however, is not so enthusiastic. He says he is aware of his civic duty, but is not in a rush to vote.
Yes, I
am registered in the permanent voters register, but realistically speaking, there are many people in Tanzania, more than 40 million people, and many of them can vote. It's not something that preoccupies me. But there are other people that can choose the right leader for us.
According to the United Nations, half of Tanzania's population is below the age of 17, making young people the largest and fastest growing portion of the country's population.
A 2016 UN report called Youth Civic Engagement showed voter turnout has decreased in many democracies since the 1980s, partly because of declining participation from young people. So, engaging young people in Tanzania may prove essential in maintaining a healthy democracy for generations to come.
The Tanzania Youth Vision Association is one of 245 organizations giving voter education in the run-up to the country's election. Its director says young people need to be aware of the dangers of not casting a ballot.
If young people say that my father, sister, my uncle, or the rest of the population will vote, then those people may also say the same. You never know, they too will be saying that young people will vote. So, hoping that someone else will vote will result in another low turnout.
According to the National Electoral Commission, 15 million young people out of a total of 29 million voters are expected to vote this year. As preparations for the elections are finalized, the Commission hopes voter education will be key to achieving a higher turnout at the polls this year. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And let's go to Cote d'Ivoire now, where campaigning is well underway for the presidential elections set for the 31st of October. The run-up to the polls has been under a tense political atmosphere. Opposition parties have called for a boycott of the vote in response to incumbent President Alassane Ouattara's bid for a third term, which they deem unconstitutional.
Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara says he is satisfied with his 10-year stint as the head of state. In his bid for another term, the RHDP ruling party candidate reassured citizens that elections will be credible.
Some candidates have so far been reluctant to participate in the elections, but I think they will understand in time that it is in their interest and the interest of the nation to take part in these elections, even though I know they will be defeated because they have no record to defend. The elections will take place in good conditions.
Supporters from varying sides say they are hoping for a peaceful electoral process.
KKB is the candidate who embodies the true new political generation in our country. He's only 52 years old. He's vigorous, intelligent and available. We have embraced his vision and we support him.
Look at all the work that President Alassane Ouattara is doing. We have a lot of infrastructure and there's still a lot more projects underway. I don't think there's anyone among the other candidates who can do the same.
Opposition parties do not believe the conditions are in place for fair and inclusive elections.
We want the Independent Electoral Commission to be reformed and the Constitutional Council to be headed by an authority that inspires confidence. That's to say, someone who can reassure us that the results of the ballot boxes are actually announced. We want everything to be done at the local level as well as the central level.
We have also asked for an audit of the current voters list, and we have asked that all the security conditions be in place for the holding of the elections in which we will participate.
The opposition party's call for civil disobedience has already led to clashes between demonstrators and police. With only a few days to go, many are waiting to see if the vote will indeed be held, and if so, what will be the political future of the country. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Well, time for us to take a breather. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Durban becomes the first city in Africa to launch a climate change action plan amid concerns about Africa's environmental vulnerabilities.
To not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Africa's food supplies, economy and health are set to get worse in the long run due to climate change. That's according to the World Meteorological Organization. The UN Climate Agency singled out floods, droughts, hotter weather and a desert locust invasion as hitting the continent particularly hard. CGTN's Joy Kiruki reports.
The harsh reality of climate change, evident across the African continent. Temperatures are said to be rising at a comparable rate to other regions. The World Meteorological Organization, though, says Africa is exceptionally vulnerable to the shock.
When we look at the data, it is unequivocal. Africa is warming. Since 1901, the continent has warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius. And when we look at 2019, we see that the year was the third warmest compared with any previous years we've had. And we also note that the years 2015 and 2019 were each warmer than any particular year prior to 2014.
The warming temperatures are taking their toll on the crop yields. The WMO has projected a reduction in yields across the continent, from 8% in East Africa to as high as 13% in West Africa.
There was an increase in food insecure and undernourished people by 45.6%. And the predictions we have, the decadal predictions we have for the period 2020 to 2024, they're indicating an increasing in terms of warming. With increased warming, we expect a reduction in terms of food production.
In the latter part of 2019, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia and Tanzania saw double the average seasonal rainfall. The rain helped crops grow, but what followed was flooding and a locust invasion that devoured hundreds of thousands of hectares of land. Those most affected remain the poor.
We also expect impacts in terms of disease and pests, but importantly, we will have impacts generated by flooding on the infrastructure system for agriculture production, which is the main source of livelihoods and food security in the continent. So all indicates that the continuing warming would probably worsen the current 45.6% increase in terms of undernourished people we've seen from 2012.
Africa's gross domestic product is estimated will fall by between 2.25% and 12.12% as temperatures rise. The WMO report recommends that affected countries take countermeasures to cushion their people. Joy Kiruki-Juma, CGTN.
Well, as cities around the world race to tackle global warming, Durban in South Africa has become the first city in Africa to launch a climate change action plan. The project outlines a strategy to reduce carbon emissions through green infrastructure and renewable energy. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Protecting against climate change is a top priority for most cities in the world. Durban is taking the lead on a continent that is expected to be hardest hit by global warming.
We're the only African city to be selected amongst the mostly European countries. So it has been an honor, but quite a mammoth task for the city.
The plan is in line with the Paris Agreement, which South Africa signed in 2016. Durban's aiming to reduce carbon emissions almost entirely through greener energy generation and infrastructure.
The 80% that we aiming to achieve by 2050, this will be based on the 50% reduction from the energy sector and about 30% also from the transport sector. We are also looking at developing and introducing a new policy in terms of the new buildings, that they need to be energy efficient.
A comprehensive solid waste strategy is also in place. The coastal city runs one of the world's most successful landfill gas-to-electricity projects for more than a decade. Methane gas is transformed into power from biodegradable waste at its flagship Marion Hill site.
Here we generate a 1 megawatt engine. You work on approximately 500 cubic meters of gas and a 50% methane content, and it'll give you enough to generate 1 megawatt of electricity. At our Bosasa Road landfill site, we have 6.5 megawatts of electricity, and we were extracting up to 4,000 cubic meters of gas per hour at that site.
Part of the project is to rehabilitate the dump once the lifespan is reached. Marion Hill is reaching capacity and will soon be closed.
You can see over there that a beautiful green belt over there is one of the cells, and it's been rehabilitated to the standard that we would want to leave this. You can utilize it for parks and recreational areas as well. So we encourage that closed loop effect where we extract the gas, we generate electricity, we do the recycling, and we treat the leachate on site as well.
A detailed strategy is still to be fleshed out, but job creation and safeguarding the poorest communities against global warming is at the heart of Durban's climate change plan. Julie Shara, CGTN, Durban, South Africa.
Still in South Africa, protesters have been urging President Cyril Ramaphosa to help stop the murders of white farmers across the country. Protesters marched to Parliament in Cape Town on Sunday demanding action. According to the non-governmental organization AfriForum, there were over 500 attacks on farms and 57 farm murders in South Africa in 2019. Renaldo Calm has more.
Farmers and supporters marched through the streets of Cape Town chanting, "The farmers are coming." They say they've had enough of farmers and farm workers being attacked and murdered on farms across South Africa.
People have been brutally murdered, and some instances where not a single thing has been taken from the houses and just been beaten to a pulp and left there for dead. And some of them being kids, being boiling water being poured over them for some reason. That must be some hate that wants to be shown towards a different race.
Our farmers are alone on the farms and they're being killed. At least every third day a person dies. And there's only about 11,000 commercial farmers. I don't know how many is left of them.
Protesters prayed and paid their respects to the victims of farm murders. And many in the crowd are farm attack survivors. Greta Peak was 6 years old when she and her young sisters witnessed their father being murdered on their farm.
My dad said he loves us and he took his last breath. We were immediately taken away from the farm. The hurt, I don't think that people understand when murdering someone. I mean, we grew up without a father. Our lives would have been so much different. The hurt doesn't go away. So we have to stand together against farm murders. We must stand together to stop farm murders.
According to the Western Cape Ministry of Agriculture, South African farmers export 50% of their agri-products to the rest of Africa. And farm murders in South Africa impact directly on the food security of people in South Africa and the entire African continent.
And therefore the President, as the chairperson of the African Union, should take note. As the chair of the African Union, he should be concerned about farm attacks, because a farm attack, a farm murder in South Africa compromise food security and political stability on the African continent.
The South African government strongly denies that farm killings are politically or racially motivated, saying that it's part of the broader crime problem in the country. Renadal Calm, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
A recent UN Security Council report has highlighted how militant group Al-Shabab reportedly invested millions of dollars that it collects in taxes from big businesses into various sectors of the Somali economy. The Horn of Africa nation has been struggling to sustain its counterinsurgency campaign. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more from Mogadishu.
Despite losing strategic towns, ports and other vital revenue sources, a United Nations report suggests that Al-Shabab remains in a strong financial position. For years, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated militant group has been accused of extorting millions of dollars from telecom, remittance companies and other financial institutions. It is these funds that have helped sustain the group that's being fought on multiple fronts by Somali, African Union and US forces. Analysts say Somalia's weak financial regulatory policy has allowed Al-Shabaab to thrive, with concerns that the group is now investing money in real estate and other sectors of the economy.
The measures in place are not strong enough to regulate Somalia's financial industry. That's why we find militant groups using banks and remittance companies to hide their finances. Authorities must work jointly with international institutions that monitor terrorism financing.
Mogadishu remains the biggest source of revenues for the terrorist group. as major companies have their headquarters in the city. Police have, in their efforts to curb terrorist financing, arrested several traders for paying taxes to the outlawed group.
Most people think giving financial support to Al-Shabab is not a crime. But we've made it clear, any individual or entity that gives money or financial support to militia groups will be arrested, tried, and sentenced under the country's laws.
For the country's business community, fear of being killed or driven out of business has forced many to comply with Al-Shabab's directives. The group collects taxes based on the size of each business, with the port towns of Kismayo and Mogadishu believed to be contributing millions of dollars each year in taxes. Thousands of people have died in Somalia and beyond since militant group Al-Shabab took up arms against the government more than a decade ago. Experts now say that a strong financial flow will continue to allow the group to sustain its ongoing guerrilla campaigns against Mogadishu and its international partners. An aerial campaign by the US military, ground operations by African Union troops and Somali forces has pushed the group out of strategic port towns in south-central regions. But the failure to liberate other parts of the country has allowed Al-Shabab to recruit and train new fighters, dealing a major blow to regional security efforts. Abdul Aziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Recapping your top stories this hour, global health experts have held their second day of high-level virtual consultations at the World Health Summit. The conference meets annually in Berlin to discuss global health challenges, but this year's event is very much focused on one main topic of conversation, COVID-19. With only 2 days left until Tanzania's general election, there is increasing emphasis on the youth vote. Over 23 million citizens were registered to cast their ballots in 2015, but only 14 million actually did so, leaving 9 million eligible voters unaccounted for. And Durban in South Africa has become the first city in Africa to launch a climate change action plan. The project outlines a strategy to reduce carbon emissions through green infrastructure and renewable energy. The plan is in line with the Paris Agreement, which South Africa signed in 2016. And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Talks between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan over the Grand Renaissance Dam resume on Tuesday. And Sudan and Israel to discuss agreements to cooperate on trade and migration in the coming weeks.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, negotiations between Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan over the controversial Grand Renaissance Dam will resume on Tuesday. African Union Chairman Cyril Ramaphosa said in a statement on Monday that the talks reaffirmed the confidence that the parties have in an African-led process. Now, Egypt had left the talks nearly 2 months ago. A dispute between the three countries over the filling and operation of the dam in Ethiopia remains unresolved even after the reservoir behind the dam began filling in July. The resumption of talks comes 2 days after Ethiopia summoned the U.S. ambassador over what it called an incitement of war between Ethiopia and Egypt by U.S. President Donald Trump over the dam dispute. Sudan's irrigation ministry said in a statement that the Tuesday talks would discuss a new model that will give a bigger role to experts and observers going forward. Meanwhile, Sudan and Israel are set to discuss agreements to cooperate on trade and migration issues in the coming weeks. This is according to a statement from the Sudanese Foreign Ministry on Sunday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, on Israel's part, tweeted that he will send wheat worth $5 million to Sudan. The U.S. brokered accord made Khartoum the third Arab government after the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to establish relations with Israel in the last 2 months, and only the fifth since 1948. Now, prominent political factions in Sudan have rejected the accord. Some Sudanese officials say that it should be approved by a transitional parliament that has yet to be formed over a year after mass unrest ousted former President Omar al-Bashir. And EgyptAir has signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ghanaian government to establish a new national airline for the West African nation. Egypt's national carrier says it secured the deal after beating competition from several European, Asian and African airlines. The headquarters of the new airline will be in Accra. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more.
It's the first deal of its kind for EgyptAir in West Africa, providing its wealth of experience to another country on the continent.
The African Airways, International Airways, were out of business since 2010. And with the credibility of EgyptAir, the staff, the crew, the ground handling, and many benefits, EgyptAir by far was the best partner for this MOU. And I guess there will be around 14 different flies from Accra to domestically within the continent, and for sure it will expand outside the continent.
The Egyptian carrier has posted losses of about $50 million a month since the outbreak of the coronavirus in Egypt last March, and the partnership with Ghana could open up new revenue streams for the stricken airlines.
West Africa was always an attractive point for many airlines to travel to Latin America and North America. You can fly only for 6 hours to Brazil, and there is lots of frequency of flights from Chicago as well. So we're depending on increasing the frequency of direct flights from Ghana and Accra to Cairo, and this will attract foreign expats to consider their holiday and business travel to Cairo instead of flying to another North African capitals and to Europe and then back to Cairo.
Besides passenger flights, establishing a viable air cargo business is a main item on the MOU. The first quarter of 2020-2021 will be the start of the free trade agreement between all African countries. This will help increase the cargo air business for both Egypt and Ghana. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And let's head to South Africa now. In the 6 months ending in June, South Africa's big four banks experienced a profit slump more significant than they did during the global financial crisis. This as they grappled with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and a nationwide lockdown. While CGTN's Angelo Coppola assesses the measures that the banks have put in place in order to help ride out the virus-led storm.
ABSA, FirstRand, Nedbank and Standard Bank suffered headline earnings losses for the period, due almost entirely to credit impairments.
If you look at the income statement before the effect of credit impairments, what you find, what we call pre-provision operating profit, that is actually shown that the banks are quite resilient, and pre-provisioning operating profit has increased 4.4%. Why is that important? Because it means that from an earnings perspective, the machinery of the banks have continued to turn.
These South African banks have taken a very similar approach to protecting their bottom lines in the initial stages of the pandemic.
Firstly, it was around protecting their people, protecting the operations of the bank, and moving quite swiftly from a focus on profitability towards tilting the balance sheets for resilience. And I think those three actions together, and obviously there were a lot more underneath that, have held the banks in good stead.
The current challenge is to ensure that those impairments don't become economic risks. But there's a bigger challenge looming in the next 6 months.
So when you have an economy like we do now, with tremendous levels of uncertainty, that is probably the biggest risk facing the banks over the next 6 months. They will navigate that based on a number of measures that they've taken over the years. For example, stress testing, building up stocks of liquidity and capital to try and navigate this very uncertain period that lies ahead.
These South African banks have a long history of being prepared for any eventuality.
And that's a credit to a variety of factors: the quality of the management teams, a very prudent and robust regulatory regime in which we operate, and regulator. And so while we all find ourselves in a once-in-a-generation crisis at the moment, I think what one needs to pause and reflect on history and think that, all things being equal, this is a crisis that the four banks will navigate with resiliency, as they have other crises in the past. And so the health of the South African banking sector, in our view, remains resilient.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And once again, it is smartphone season around the world. Huawei just launched its new Mate 40 model on Thursday. And of course, Apple's new 5G iPhone 12 goes on sale today. Sure enough, people are hurrying to buy their phones, but many are rushing for the old ones. Here's Chen Tong taking a closer look.
It may seem strange that when new smartphones come out, there are people who start searching for the old ones. But in fact, there are a lot of people who do just that. And Zhu Weigang is one of them. He bought his iPhone 11 in May on a second-hand product app and paid almost 2,000 yuan less than he would have buying a new one. Zhu is a frequent shopper for second-hand phones. He buys 5 or 6 models a year.
I started to be attracted to these electronic products in 2018. I buy second-hand phones because they are better value for money. The functions between new phones and old phones are not that much different. For example, the iPhone 12 is coming out now, and that makes an 11 a much better value.
So while the iPhone 12 starts to be delivered into the eager hands of China's buyers, Zhu is now in the market for a second-hand iPhone 11 Pro. He is far from alone. Last month, millions of second-hand phones were posted for sale on Xianyu, which reports sales value for used smartphones is now up nearly 55% year-on-year. Apple and Huawei are among the most popular picks. And this seems to happen every time the companies come out with something new.
Sales of Apple products jumped by 92% month-on-month, 1 month after its new products were released last year. Huawei saw sales jump by more than 200% 1 month after its new product release.
Recycling platform Aihuishou reports the same thing. The company recycles used smartphones and also sells the second-hand models. Aihuishou says most of the buyers on its platform are young people, and that this reflects changing purchasing behavior on the part of young Chinese. They are now less prone to impulse buying and more likely to consider value for money when making purchasing decisions.
Consumers that buy second-hand phones and recycle their old ones are becoming younger. Whether you want to use a second-hand item really depends on what you think of the idea. Young people are becoming more thoughtful about their shopping. They don't now necessarily think that buying a second-hand product will make people look down on them. It's a shopping decision, nothing more. This idea is becoming more and more accepted in China.
Of course, all of this will only recharge the second-hand phone market. Data from the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology show that China is expected to generate 524 million old smartphones this year, and that the stock of the second-hand phones in the country now exceeds 2 billion. Only 2% of China's old smartphones are being recycled. So there are plenty of them around if you want one. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, talks between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan over the Grand Renaissance Dam resume on Tuesday. We'll be looking at what to expect. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Vicham. Well, let's take a short break, but here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, how a group of South African women are weathering disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Cote, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the suffering of women across the globe. However, it has also shown their strength. In South Africa, one street vendor stood out for her resilience that saw her steady her business even during the lockdown. CGTN's Lindy Mtongana visited Phyllis Munyai, who sells fruits and vegetables in downtown Johannesburg, and now brings us her inspiring story.
Street vendors or hawkers are an integral part of urban economies around the world. They offer a wide range of products and services in public spaces. In South African cities, hawkers or street vendors have a strong presence at taxi ranks, sports stadiums and railway stations. They mostly occupy available space surrounding shopping malls and at busy intersections. Phyllis Munyai has been a hawker in downtown Johannesburg for over 2 decades. She tells us that she couldn't finish school as a result of lack of finances. But that didn't deter her, and she's been able to feed her family through selling fruits and vegetables.
My children are at least able to have food on the table. I'm able to buy them nice things like other kids. They're not forced to steal because they know their mother is here.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a negative impact on her small business.
Prices are much higher now. It's difficult to cope. Under lockdown, everything is expensive, so it's hard to make a profit.
She contends that her kind of work can be quite challenging, but she's always up for it.
Business needs someone who is quite patient. It can be on and off. Sometimes people buy, sometimes they just don't. You just have to persevere. Rain or no rain, cold or not cold, I'm here every day.
According to Statistics South Africa, most street vendors provide the main source of income for their households, bringing food to their families and paying school fees for their children. Lindy Mtongana for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, 4 Cape Town friends who were retrenched when the restaurant they worked in shut down have teamed up to start a new pop-up restaurant in the city. 2 of them work as chefs, while the other 2 run front-of-house operations. Al-Shabab has their story.
Their restaurant is called Oxalis Eatery. It's been named after a resilient plant that bloomed in the Cape recently. And resilience is definitely one of the qualities these 4 restaurateurs relied on when they lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 lockdown a few weeks ago. In order to make a living, they decided to open their own place.
And in the hospitality industry, to look for a job at the moment would have probably been impossible. We all know each other very well. We know where our mind is, and we share the same vision towards food and service.
It was definitely out of necessity that we looked at each other and we said, like, what are we going to do to make a living for the next 4 or 5 months or a year? Not knowing how the industry was going to work out. And yeah, then from there we decided to open Oxalis. We got stuff from our own homes, we've borrowed plates and crockery and glasses and everything, and just to make it all happen.
They put their savings, talent and plenty of special ingredients together to create a bistro-style restaurant.
Here at Oxalis, we like to introduce some local ingredients that people may not have heard of without it being too experimental. So I would say the cured and smoked tuna, served with avo and soy and lime dressing, is really delicious. We also use a lot of beach herbs in a lot of our dishes. So you would find that on our bocconcini salad. And then, of course, we also use a lot of oxalis leaves in a lot of our salads.
The food is very accessible, easy, affordable. We wanted a place that was kind of felt like a new neighborhood spot that everybody could come in sort of more than once a week. It is quite casual atmosphere, like all of us are like the waitresses here.
It's a casual environment where people do come for the food and the people and the vibe. So we wanted to create that environment where people are comfortable. To make people come out and to make them feel comfortable is a big thing. You need to keep in mind their feelings, their thoughts of COVID-19.
The owners of the Oxalis Eatery say they have 5 months left on their lease, which ends in March. They are not entirely sure about the future of their pop-up restaurant at this stage. But the four friends believe they have the necessary resilience, strength and drive to tackle whatever challenge life throws them next.
Staying strong, staying hopeful, and eating good food. Cheers!
Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And coming up in your sport.